Well, I wanted to
Yes, I don't need the
share with
glasses.
all of you one of my friends from the outdoor industry, and it's somebody who I look up to and admire as an outdoors person because my friend Keith Crowley, he's an author. He's been done several books, and you're a photographer and an editor. But would you just introduce yourself for my audience because I don't even know how much work you've done in the outdoor industry, and I would hate to discredit the many things you've done.
Well, I don't have anywhere near the background that you do, of course, but I have been doing this since the late 80s. I guess I sold my first story to a hunting magazine back in 88. And the photos kind of came along with the territory. In fact, an editor told me your writing is excellent and your photos suck, so you got to get better at your photography. And so I took that to heart, and right now, photography and writing are about 50-50% of the time I spend working in the industry. It's about half and half. And for a while there, photography was even more, probably 75% of my output in the industry. But yeah, I've been doing it a long time.
Very cool. And I know I've seen, I get all the press releases and stuff, but you've worked on some different books in with a lot of upland photography and bird dog stuff. And I know you have a bird dog. Can you tell us a little about that?
About my bird dog, about Ruby, who's sitting next to me here,
Yeah.
yawning because she's bored by this
This
whole
is so
process.
boring.
Yeah, I've had Ruby is my sixth dog now, fifth or sixth. And I started out with Springers and switched to Labs. And Ruby now is a setter, an English setter. One of the very first stories I ever wrote was a fictional piece that was a hunting story, and it was about a little setter. So ever since then, and this is going on 35, almost 40 years ago that I wrote the story, just always loved the look of English setters. So got myself one. I'd have her wave to you, but she's being nice now, so I'm gonna I'm gonna let her live in peace for the
Let
moment.
her hang
But
out
yeah,
while she's
so
being good.
yeah, and I started out I'm a lifelong hunter, and I grew up. My dad was a bird hunter. That's all he cared about. He really didn't do much else. Ruffed grouse, woodcock, pheasants, that type of thing. So I grew up in that environment, and we never had dogs when I was younger. So as soon as I moved out, I got myself a dog, and I can't imagine being without a dog or two.
Excellent. I personally have several dogs. I have four that live at our house,
Oh,
and yeah, so they're being good right now, also, which is always a contention of recording a podcast. Is if they see an intruder or a fox walk by the back door, there might be a
yeah,
ruckus.
it's a risk, but we love having them, and I can't imagine life without one.
Yeah, we love having them. And then, like for me, with the wildlife here in the area, we live in their habitat. So unless they're disrupting things or threatening my animals, they get to live in the area as well. And
You bet.
I invited you to come on the show because of your work in the outdoor industry, but also because of a rant that you had shared on Facebook. And it was something that really caught my attention. And for my listeners, I'll share a link to Keith's rant in the show
Okay,
notes so that you
good.
can check that out for yourself and see everything, the details that were put in there. But to kind of summarize the rant, you talked about wake boats and loons' nests and habitat, and then the populations of the loons as well. And
Right.
this, I'm guessing, you said the northern lakes. What area is that?
Well, I grew up in Minnesota, and
Minnesota.
Minnesota is the land of 10,000
Yep.
lakes, and loons are the state bird. So we were always surrounded by them. I live in northern Wisconsin now, and the northern half of Wisconsin is much like Minnesota. There are thousands and thousands of lakes, and all of it is loon habitat, loon territory, at least historically loon territory. And loon populations have actually been declining for years and years, and declining pretty precipitously in Wisconsin in particular. There's ongoing studies that, boy, it's been like 15% a year that the populations are declining. And for a variety of reasons, there's all kinds of problems with loons, but the wake boat rant, because I live on a lake and it's a smaller lake, and we have loons. There's at least 3 nesting pairs on our lake. every year they come back, or their offspring come back. You don't know if it's the exact same loon or not, unless they've been banded. And they come back and they try to nest in the same general area, often in the same nest. And so in the last few years, wake boats have become a huge issue. And I don't know, are you even familiar with wake boats and what they are and what they're designed to do?
Yeah, it's so for me, the part of why your rant caught my attention is I used to work for Colorado Parks and Wildlife before it was Parks and Wildlife. I worked for Parks, and I actually was an aquatic nuisance educator and inspector. And so
Oh, wow.
wake boats were always the ones that they were just so upset that they had to take the 5 minutes to get their boat checked, and they just wanted to go out and play. And so there's this thing with wake boats, and I have friends that have them. I enjoy, wakeboarding. I enjoy water skiing and stuff like that. And I understand the recreation part of it, but also I am all about conservation, and I care about the wildlife, the habitat, and all of that. And so it's something that when you put this about loons, it's not something that had never occurred to me. So I really wanted to learn more about the loons and about what's going on up there.
That's why I did it, because the issue that most people have with wake boats are designed to create big wakes so that you can have an endless wave to surf. I mean, that's what they're created for. And most people have problems with erosion, and they're kind of a hazard for small craft and swimmers, and they're a nuisance, and everybody kind of gets tired of being blasted by big wakes on the water. But nobody thinks about the fact that in our area, the loons, the way they nest is loons can't walk very well on dry ground. Their legs are so far back they have trouble moving on dry land. So when they nest, they always nest right at the edge of the water and never more than 6 inches above the water. They're right down at the water line. And so the wake boats, it only takes one wake boat to get close to that nest, and the nests literally get washed away, or they get flooded and the eggs get chilled from the water. And there's studies going on about this now too. And even in our area, there are artificial nesting platforms. They're little pontoons, and they're out there for the loons to nest on. And they work well. The loons do use them and come to them year after year. But when those little islands, floating islands, artificial islands, get hit by a wake, it really rocks and rolls them. And the eggs can crack. They've discovered that the eggs banging into each other in the waves will literally crack. And so there goes another nest. And the loons will nest, they'll try again, but they'll only try one more time before they're done. They'll nest, and if that one doesn't take, or they lose the chicks, they'll nest again. But that's it. They have to have, the loons really need to be fledged by about this time of year. The young birds need to be able to fly, because the adults leave early and the young ones are left on their own. And sometimes right before freeze up, you'll still see some late hatch loons out on the lake, and you wonder and you hope that they're going to be able to find open water as things freeze up to take off. They need a long runway to take off. I'm sure people's videos of them running across the surface of the lake to gain enough airspeed to take off, like swans and other big birds like so. But yeah, the loon nest thing, apparently nobody thinks about it, and it didn't occur to anybody. So when I made the rant, all of a sudden I heard from a lot of people going, yeah, and wake boats are bad about this and that, and the erosion and the invasive species they can carry in their ballast tanks and all that kind of stuff. But I never thought about the fact that the loons are that affected by it. And it's such an issue in our area with the loons and the other, detracting factors. I don't mind that wake boats exist, but they can't really exist on small bodies of water. That's been the big issue, is the 100-foot rule to stay 100 feet from shore if you're creating a wake. That applies very well to ski boats. You're skiing. Ski boats don't create huge wakes like that. But for a wake boat, they just can't really function on a small body of water. Like the lake I live on is about 880 acres. And that's small for wake boats, but there's 3 or 4 people with wake boats out there, and we lose nests. So that's where the rant came from, was the loons don't need that kind of help. Let's put it that way.
Yeah,
They're already in dire straits.
it
So
sounds like a
that
predicament. And
was,
so, in the area up there, the agencies are currently working on it, putting a what do you call it, a fake nest out there, a temporary nest for them. What else are they doing to help with the issue?
so, well, the wake boat issue has actually come to a head now, and Wisconsin's unique. We have what's called a Conservation Congress, where every resident of the state in April of every year gets to vote on new wildlife and fisheries proposals. And those votes are directly counted county by county. Everybody in the state, and even non-residents, can participate in this. And this year there were 7 questions directly related to wake boats and future regulations on them, limiting them to bigger bodies of water, keeping them further away from shore, things like that. Nobody wants to do away with wake boats because I don't surf, but it looks like fun. So I understand the appeal of them, but we just can't have them tearing up the shoreline and tearing up the loon nests. So there's active legislative things coming down the pike, at least in Wisconsin. I can't speak for other states. I haven't really researched it enough, but I know that there are groups in New England, in Michigan, and Minnesota, nonprofits who are studying this, and there's people trying to create better artificial nesting platforms for them too, and we're figuring out ways to put baffles around so the wakes don't hit them as hard. And I mean, there are people actively studying it, but wildlife agencies are notoriously underfunded, and they've got bigger fish to fry. So the wheels turn slowly.
Right. And so even some of those tools make me wonder how much they're going to impact the loons themselves. Like, if you're going to put some type of baffles around there, are they going to be able to get over that when they're youngsters? Or is it something that's going to inhibit their way to clear water, like you were saying?
Yeah, it's actively being researched. In fact, there's a company has a website, a company that produces those artificial nesting rafts. They have a website, and they have some interesting videos showing wakes hitting the nests, and the different techniques they're using to try to mitigate that. Hopefully they'll figure it out, and hopefully they'll figure it out soon. Like I said, loon populations are decreasing a little faster than we're comfortable with right now. Loons, as you know, they're the iconic lake, Northwoods lake species. A lake in my area without loons just isn't the same. You have to have the loons out there.
Yeah. And so, more about the loons. Are they a bird that migrates from like Canada down to South America, or what's their pattern of migration?
The Gulf Coast, if you go down to the Gulf Coast in the winter, you will see a lot of loons. There's a lot of them. We were down in the panhandle of Florida this past winter, and there were loons all over the place. So yeah, they migrate. They move from, I don't know if any of them get into Central America or not, but the entire Gulf Coast from Mexico all the way around Florida. And I'm sure there are some out in the Chesapeake Bay and in that area too. As I said, the adults tend to migrate pretty early. It's always disconcerting when we're sitting there watching from our windows and you see these juvenile loons out there all alone. They can feed themselves by that point, but you don't know how strong of flyers they are. But hey, they figured out this system thousands of years ago, and they know how it works. And like I said, it gets really frightening when the lake starts to freeze, though, and there's still loons. And sometimes the juvenile bird, there'll be 6 or 7 or 8 of them together too. There'll be a big group of them. Loons are normally pretty solitary, but at that time of year, this time of year right now, they tend to bunch up.
And they bunch up right before they head out to fly?
Yep. Yep, just like what most waterfowl does that. They get together and they've spent all summer loafing around and molting and doing all that stuff, and then they all gang up and head south in mass. So that's what loons do too. Not there, you're not going to see a flock of 100, but you'll see 10 together.
And or do they have other issues with predators there, or is it just like a common part of their existence, or are the predators being managed?
That's why these artificial islands work so well. Loons like to nest on islands because it protects them from predators. Obviously, raccoons, skunks. I was photographing the nest, right? We had a nest that we could watch literally from our deck this year through spotting scope. And we could watch them turning the eggs, and we could watch the whole process happen. And one morning I kayaked over, got about 50, 80 yards away from the nest with a big lens, and I sat there very quietly. And while I was watching, a bobcat snuck up behind the nest. But they were far enough out in the water on a little clump of reeds that the cat didn't want to get wet, so it didn't go any further. But they have lots of predators. And crows will come and take the eggs, and snapping turtles, which we have in abundance, will take the eggs. I know that there's a lot of predators for adult loons because they're a handful. I wouldn't want to fight an adult loon. They can be pretty aggressive birds, the adults. So they let you know if you've gotten too close, I'll tell you that.
Okay. And with the population... With the population declining, is there still the opportunity to hunt loons, or are they off limits in the area?
No, they've never been huntable. No, there's no hunting of loons. Never has been. I wouldn't want to eat one anyway. All they eat is fish. It's like mergansers. So, it wouldn't taste very good.
Yeah. And so, I mean, a goal, if they're not able to be hunted, then their numbers have not been too great at all. So a goal would be to have them increase instead of decrease, correct?
Right. And there are other, one of the things that really affects loons on a year-to-year basis, at least their nesting success, there's a fly called the loon fly, and it's a type of black fly, same, general species as we find annoying in the summer. But these flies are so specialized that they only live on loon blood. And so if you were to go to my website, you can find photos of these loons absolutely covered with hundreds and hundreds of these flies. Every bit of their head and their eyelids and around their beaks is just covered in, and I can't think of the Latin name of this fly, but I've been told it's the most species interspecific. I'm going to get this wrong, but these flies, because they only bite common loons, it's like the most interdependent parasitic relationship in the world, that these flies only bite common loons. And this year was bad for a couple of weeks, but if the loons can tolerate it for a couple of weeks and sit on the nest and just get bit and just let these flies have at them, if they can do it for a couple of weeks, the life cycle of those flies is very short. And this year, our pair of loons that we could watch all spring, they hatched 2 chicks, and it was a wonderful thing to see. Lead has become an issue with the loons, and a fishing tackle is a huge issue with loons. They get tangled in fishing line all the time. There's a loon rescue group in Wisconsin, and they have a Facebook page, and you can follow along with their adventures. And virtually, every other day, they're rescuing a loon that got tangled up in fishing line that was either left at a landing or just out there in the weeds or whatever.
Yeah, that's something that we try to educate when we're out fishing, when you're on the river banks or, preparing to launch boats and stuff like that, because you do find a lot of monofilament in random places, and especially where we are, our lake, it's a reservoir, and when they release water down to the lower areas, and that water drops, and you find so much fishing line in there that it's tangling so many things. So for the listeners, that's something that you really need to pay attention to, because there are a lot of things that get tangled up in that line. So
it affects That's right. It affects all kinds of different species, and loons are just one of them.
Yeah.
We've had turtles that we've had cut loose, and it's kind of a omnipresent thing on all of our northern lakes that there's fishing line scattered around. It's a shame because our lakes, a single boat landing has a collection station for this monofilament line. It's like, please bring it here, put it in this receptacle so that it doesn't tangle up all the wildlife. And it also, it can get tangled in propellers on outboards too, and it destroys the prop seal, so the prop shaft seals get cut up by it, and it causes lower unit damage on boats all the time too. So,
And for
it's
some of
just
those
something to be aware.
Yeah, some of the inboard boats, they actually suck that up internally as well. And thinking of that, we mentioned the wakeboard boats specifically, but are the regular ski boats or bass boats, they're kind of exempt from the wakes, or do they just don't produce the large wakes, so it's not as have an impact?
That's exactly right. That's what it is. The bass. Everybody in the state of Wisconsin, at least, there's 100-foot safety zone around the entire perimeter of every body of water. I think it's every body of water that has a public landing. I could be getting that wrong. There's a statewide law that you can't create a wake within 100 feet of shore. And that's fine for ski boats, fishing boats, bass boats aren't designed to throw the huge wakes. But wake boats, you know how they work. They fill their rear end with ballast so that it drops low. And then the comes up and the stern drops, and they go slow, and they just create this massive perpetual wave. And so the wake boats are a much bigger issue than bass boats, ski boats. Anybody else out on the water isn't creating that same level of potential destruction.
Yeah, and I just think of that when you're out either kayaking or when you've got your boat, kind of you're trolling along the shore, and then you don't even see the boat come by, but you feel the wakes later, and you know what kind of a boat it was.
Yeah, it's a hazard for swimmers. It's a hazard for kayakers. I've been anchored in my little John boat trying to catch panfish, and if you don't see it coming, you're not paying attention, it'll throw you off balance. I mean, those waves are huge. You're talking about boats that are designed to throw 2-foot, even 3-foot wakes, which is what you need to surf, right?
Right.
You can't surf on a 6-inch wake. So I like I said, I don't mind people having fun, and I appreciate the recreational side of it, but it only takes one irresponsible wake boat to do a lot of damage. I've got neighbors on my lake who've lost all kinds of trees, and I was talking to one of them. In fact, he's a retired warden, a game warden in Wisconsin, and he's lost a dozen or so trees. And I asked him what he's doing. He said, well, we're bringing in rock to protect the shoreline. It's $100 a foot to bring in erosion control. Well, an average lot in our area, an average lot is 100 feet. So that's $10,000 worth of of rock to bring in to stabilize the shoreline. And that didn't exist. We didn't have that problem 15 years ago. It's really taken off in the last 5 years. That's when you really have seen the greater number of wake boats. We never saw them on our lake, and now, like I said, there's 2 or 3. There's 2 for sure that residents have, and there's at least one more I see regularly. And a small lake like ours, it only takes one boat to do one foolish thing, and it causes a lot of problems. It's really hard. It's really hard for them to obey the law. On a lake like ours, there are areas where it's difficult to stay 100 feet from shore and stay in deep enough water. They're supposed to stay in water, I think it's 20 feet deep. And it's virtually impossible to do that on our lake. For them to stay legal is tricky. And enforcement would be an issue anyway. As it is with a lot of, lake issues, enforcement becomes problematic.
Right. A lot of that goes down to the character of the person, whoever is the captain of that boat. And in your state, do they have bow hunter ed there, or not bow hunter,
Oh,
but boating education?
it's
Don't they?
available. It's not required.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
it's available, but it's not required. There are snowmobiling and ATVing. I believe you're required to take a course, but not boating. And
But not for
you'll see
boating.
a lot
Okay.
of yeah, you'll see a lot of kids out there in boats. But frankly, the young people are not the ones with wake boats. Wake boats are too expensive.
Right. They are expensive.
It's yeah, they're not cheap boats. They're very expensive. So yeah, I most of the time it's an adult that I see behind the wheel of these boats.
Yeah. And so, is there any other way that the boaters are educated about the effects of their activities, or is it just kind of like on social media? I was educated by your post. Is that kind of the only way people are learning about this?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's becoming a big enough issue now that we had a local writers conference in Wisconsin, the Wisconsin Outdoor Writers. One of the speakers was addressing this issue specifically. Um, and had some really good information. I didn't know about that when I wrote my rant. I talked to him since that and learned a lot of things that I didn't know before. Like I said, when I wrote the rant, I was really kind of taken aback by how many people really don't like wake boats. It's not just about the loons, but that was the eye opener for them, is that it never occurred to them that loons, and there are other songbirds and such that nest right at the water's edge too. But the loons, everybody loves loons, so that became kind of a hot button. So that's why that ran and it took off. I don't know anybody who doesn't like loons. There's
Right.
probably somebody out there who doesn't like them,
Who
but I
does?
don't
Well, I'm
know them.
sure there's someone. Probably the wakeboarders.
Yeah, there you go. That's right. That's right. They don't like them. Dang loons.
If they weren't there, they could just have a good time. So, are
Yeah,
you?
well, I think they know. I think the wake boaters kind of are getting the sense that there's a lot of regulations coming down the pike. As I said, Wisconsin is formalizing it now. When they put questions on these questionnaires, typically those turn into laws if they get a big enough response. And I counted up the tally statewide by county, and it turned out it was about, in fact, it was almost exactly a 2-to-1 margin on all 6 or 7 of the questions, favoring more regulations on wake boats. So it was a pretty universal feeling that they need to be more responsible and they need to have more regulations. But again, you can regulate, but enforcement, that's a whole different,
Right.
you know, with thousands and thousands of lakes in northern Wisconsin, it's going to be tough to regulate and be out there enforcing that.
For sure. Wow. And is this happening like year round up there, or you guys have the lakes will freeze in November, December, and you guys have a break from all of it, or just the recreation
Yeah,
kind of, is it just a summertime thing?
yeah. Our lakes will have 3 feet of ice on them, and there's no boating of any kind. So yeah, it's a seasonal issue, and it's typically a seasonal issue during the peak of summer, the high season, Memorial Day to Labor Day.
Hmm.
We just had Labor Day as we're recording this, and there'll be a marked decline in all boat traffic on our lakes now. Hunters will kind of take over. The duck hunters will be out, and they'll be the kayakers and the canoeists will be paddling the backwaters and whatnot. So it becomes a quiet season in the fall, and winter we're froze up solid. So it's 4 months, 3 months really of issue. But that's right when the loons nest at the very end of May. I think our loons laid their first egg on May 25th or 26th and hatched about a month later, about 3.5 weeks later. So towards the end of June is when they're hatching, and that's right when everybody's hitting the water.
Yeah.
So I guess I didn't realize this myself until just recently, but loons get struck by boats quite a bit, and that's
Mm.
fishing boats, and that's everybody's boats. If it's a fast boat, sometimes they can't get out of the way. And this loon rescue group just lost one yesterday. I read a post. They just had to retrieve one they ended up euthanizing it. It had been struck by a boat, and it was in too bad a shape to survive. So that's a shame. And that was an adult loon. That wasn't even a chick. So we're having a lot of impact with our boats on our poor loons.
Yeah, and so are they? You said referred to them in conjunction with like a merganser when we were talking about if you would eat them or not. But are they a diving duck like a merganser? Because I know on our lake you'll see some of the boaters trying to like see if they can get a merganser, but they dive down before they get to them and stuff like that. Is that something that you're seeing with the loons?
Boy, I haven't seen it, boy. And if I did, I'd be on the phone quicker. You could say Jack Robinson. Yeah, that would really grind me.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I have not witnessed that. Loons are exceptionally good swimmers, as they have to be. When you see them, they will pass under your boat sometimes. If you're anchored fishing, they'll go right under your boat, and the speed that they move is incredible. I mean, they are so good at swimming when they have these big, giant flippers on them, and they're shaped like a torpedo. And they also catch some remarkably large fish and eat them. I'm always amazed. I watched a loon on our lake about 3 years ago. It was a northern pike that it caught, and that northern pike had to be 18 inches long, and that loon swallowed it. It took him a long time to swallow it.
Wow.
And I photographed it doing this, but yeah, it finally swallowed this northern pike, which I couldn't believe myself. But
yeah,
they're
incredible.
efficient. Yeah, they're incredible birds, and they're lovely. Of course, everybody likes to look at them, and then the calls they make are just so haunting, and like I said, they're the iconic species of the North Woods. If you don't have loons, it just doesn't feel like you have the mountains out where you are for wilderness. We have the lakes. That's our wilderness, and the loons are a huge part of that.
Huge. So incredible. Well, I really thank you for sharing the information because, as I said, I wanted to learn, and so I figured my listeners may want to learn as well. And it was an issue that, as you mentioned, I was like, wait, what? Like, it's something that I hadn't thought about. I mean, there are other nesting birds, but being here in the Rocky Mountains, our lakes are different than your lakes and stuff like that. But
you still have loons, though, right? I mean, I've photographed loons in Yellowstone, so you have loons in some of those high mountain lakes, don't you?
I have not seen one in any of our high mountain lakes, but where we live, we're on the Pacific Flyway, and where we are, right. We don't do a lot of waterfowl hunting here. I mean, I always try to engage in waterfowl hunting, but it's like to get your limit of birds is like incredible because there's usually not enough birds around to get your limit in the day. We have a lot of geese, right. And so the Canada geese,
sure.
It's season right now, and I've been haying, so I haven't shot any, but there's a bunch of them out in the field. But other than that, I think I've seen blue-winged teal in the Central Flyway. I've seen some teal over there, and a cinnamon teal I had once at our other ranch in the front pond, the ranch where Leah lives. There was a cinnamon teal there.
Yeah, you have cinnamon teal. We don't have cinnamon teal here. Yeah. They're beautiful birds.
Well, that's the one and only time I saw one, and that's been probably 10 years ago that I saw that in our pond there. So anytime I learn about other birds, it's super exciting. Or we used to go every September to Louisiana to hunt waterfowl, and it's just amazing, all the birds down there. It's so exciting.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a hot spot.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the adventure that you're on right now. Can people know about it, or can they, if they want to follow you on social media to see what's going on? Is that okay?
Sure. Yeah, I post. I don't post daily, but I post when I have a signal. And yeah, we're hunting. We're hunting the Montana openers September 1st for upland. For at least the prairie birds. And so sharp-tailed grouse, Hungarian partridge, and sage grouse. Sage grouse are also in really tough shape, population-wise, continent-wide. So I'm not going to shoot any, but we do occasionally, my dog will occasionally point a group of sage grouse, and it's fun to watch them go. Huge birds, but we are absolutely interested in hunting sharptails and Hungarian partridge, and they're delicious, and they're at this time of year they're great for a young pointing dog. My dog is just over 2, so she's still got a lot to learn, and the young birds at this time of year are good at holding still and not running. So there's pheasants here too. I'm in northeastern Montana at the moment. I'm going to be working my way west to see what I see. But lots of pheasants, but that season doesn't open until October, and we'll be long gone by then.
Oh, dang. But I'm sure you'll have another hunting adventure after this one.
Oh, I have multiple hunting adventures lined up. Yeah, there's South Dakota, there's North Dakota, and we bought a house in Arizona last year, and so we've been hunting quail all winter long in Arizona. So that's been fun too. That was an excuse to buy a house. Getting a sitter was an excuse to buy a house in Arizona. I have to have a quail dog, so I have to have a quail house. So we go down there just
I like the way you're thinking.
I've kind of become an itinerant upland hunter, kind of a bird bum, I guess you would call me.
Well, it sounds like a fun problem to have, and you can migrate when birds migrate, so you can go from your northern house to your southwest house.
Yeah, those Wisconsin winters can be pretty brutal, so Arizona's a lot more appealing in January, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, and I must say I've been kind of admiring that adventure, because it's something that I have on my list, is to go to Arizona and hunt quail, and I'm going to check it off one of these years when I'm not too super busy. But I've been watching that to see what you've been up to and looking at all your pictures. Your pictures, of course, are so inviting to be out there just chasing birds.
Make sure you give me a call before you come down. I might have a tip for you.
A tip or two, okay. Well, I do want to thank you for being on the podcast and for educating me and my listeners to what's going on with the birds and the habitat and all of that. It seems like recreation has huge impacts, and I think even more than we realize sometimes. Here in the Rocky Mountains, it's more like mountain bikes and e-bikes and stuff like that they think they don't have an impact on the wildlife, but as more studies happen, which are slow, as you mentioned, they're learning that there are impacts. So hopefully we can learn to work around the wildlife and respect their areas. So thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. You're 100% correct. Nobody I know is out there deliberately trying to negatively affect wildlife or wildscapes. They're not doing it on purpose. It's just, it never occurs to people that, if they're out on their e-bikes or their mountain bikes in your area, if they're going through elk habitat or just even hiking at the right time of year, March, when the animals are stressed and coming out of winter, it can really affect those animals. And for us, it's lakes and loons, and for you, elk, and we just have to pay attention to what we're doing and kind of look beyond our own little sphere and see if it's having a greater impact or not.
Right. And it's good that people are getting outside more. And it seems like, as you mentioned before we got cut off earlier, when the pandemic happened, everybody went to the outdoors. And some of them have kind of dropped away, but there's still a huge number of people that are enjoying the outdoors. So hopefully we can educate them to enjoy it respectfully.
Exactly. Yeah, it's good that there are people out there. You can't you don't develop a respect for it if you don't get to participate in it. You have to be actively involved in it, and then you care enough to protect it. But there is a learning curve, as we all know. We all have to learn what the boundaries are. So yeah, it's good. I'm glad you're doing this podcast. I'm glad you're out there doing what you do every week, and I get your newsletter and I pay attention. So
I've kind of slacked on the newsletters through the summer. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's actually on my to-do list is to get back to my newsletters.
Yeah, well, I enjoy all your work too, and hopefully we'll see each other at one of these conferences coming up soon.
Yeah, hopefully. For my audience, would you let them know where they can find you or your work or how they can support you?
So just crowleyimages.com is my website. So CROWLEY images.com, one word. They'll have links there to my writing, to all of my photography, and they can see what I'm up to. And I update that site regularly, so there'll be a current crop of photos and a current crop of written material on there. And just poke around on the website, and you'll get a feel for what I'm doing.
Very cool. Thank you again.
Otherwise,
Uh-huh. Go ahead.
yeah, otherwise social media too. I'm fairly active on Facebook and Instagram. So, Instagram is just at Keith R. Crowley. And so look me up, follow me. I'm posting from the road here as I get good signals. I'm trying to update daily. I can't do that, but every other day or every third day for sure.
Very good. Thank you again, Keith. I hope you have a great hunting trip.
And so far, so good. Thanks, Mia.
Awesome. All right. Well, have a good one. Thank you for spending some time with me.
Hey, this is Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, host of the Armed Lutheran Radio podcast, reminding you that the podcast you're listening to is a proud member of the Self-Defense Radio Network. Check out all the great content at selfdefenseradio.net.